Oh my God, my upstairs neighbours have just started banging.
Frankie. Do you mean banging or?
No, cooking. Cooking, I hope. And even they've been told not to make any noise this evening.
Frankie, you do realise we're live?
Oh, hello, world.
Hi, my name's Gordon Brown. Welcome along to the Bloody Scotland Book Club for September. We've got some great books to chat to you about. We're going to be talking about Ann Cleeves and Raven Black, the first in the Shetland series. We're talking about The Serial Killer's Wife by Alice Hunter, and we're talking about Bloody January by Alan Parks. A couple of things just need to let you know. There is a chat function around. You can chat amongst yourselves. We will be announcing the books for next month at the end of this. And if any of you were at Bloody Scotland a couple of weekends ago, there's still about a day left in which you could access the digital version of it if you want. So it's still accessible, after which it disappears into the ether. So what I'll do is I'll introduce the other people on the screen, just so you know who's there and it's not just me. So we have Frankie. Hi, Frankie.
Hello, everybody.
Frankie's a host, chairperson and organiser of book launches, publishing events, tours and clubs, and sometimes comedy, music, theatre and art. There's not much she doesn't do. An ex-bookseller with a pipe dream of travelling bookshop, taking mostly crime books, authors and events to places that others don't reach. That's Frankie.
That's me.
We got Noelle Holten, runs the award-winning blog Crime Book Junkie. She is the PR and social media manager for Bookouture, a leading digital publisher in the UK, and worked as a senior probation officer for 18 years, covering a variety of risk cases, as well as working in a multi-agency setting. Dead Inside, her debut novel that published in 2019 with one more chapter, HarperCollins UK, is an international Kindle bestseller. I'm not jealous in the slightest about that. And the start of the new series featuring DC Maggie Jameson. There are 4 more books in the series, with Dead Mercy published in November 2021, so it's just coming down the line. She's now writing her 6th book, a standalone, which will be out in the summer of 2022. Hi, Noelle.
Hi.
And Gordon McGhie is a book blogger, best known online as Grab This Book. He won the 2017 British Blog Awards, Hidden Gem category, and earlier this year was invited by the Bookseller magazine to be a guest judge for the crime and thriller category at the 2021 British Book Awards. When Gordon doesn't have his nose stuck in a book, he works as a complaints manager within the financial service industry. Hi, Gordon.
Hey,
How are we all tonight?
Great.
we're good.
Good. Yeah, good.
Can I ask, have you all read the books?
Yes.
Yes.
So the way we're going to do this is we're going to take one at a time, have a chat around the book individually. So to kick off, what we'll do is we're going to look at Ann Cleeves and Raven Black first. And just to give us a bit of background, Frankie's going to give us a little bit of the blurb, and then we've got a wee video from Ann to show you before we start chanting. So Frankie, over to you.
So I'm going to read the back of the book, just so that we've got the basic blurb, and then we've got, I'm sure we're going to have a good feisty discussion about the plot and characters there within. So bear with whilst I read. On New Year's Day, there we go, there's the book, by the way. On New Year's Day, Shetland lies buried beneath a deep layer of snow. Trudging home, Fran Hunter's eye is drawn to a vivid splash of colour on the white ground, ravens circling above. It's the strangled body of her teenage neighbour. As Fran opens her mouth to scream, the ravens continue their deadly dance. The body is found close to the home of a lonely outcast, and local suspicion falls firmly on him. But when Inspector Jimmy Perez insists on broadening the search for suspects, a veil of distrust and fear is thrown over the entire community. As the case develops, Perez finds himself peering deeper into the past of the Shetland Islands than anyone wants to go. So there we go. It's the first in the Shetland series. So it's about 15 years old now, I think. Yep. So I'm going to let Anne do a little chat about it, and then we'll launch in.
Hello, I'm Ann Cleeves, and I'm going to read a short piece from the beginning of Raven Black. 1:20 in the morning on New Year's Day. Magnus knew the time because of the fat clock, his mother's clock, which squatted on the shelf over the fire. In the corner, the raven in the wicker cage muttered and croaked in its sleep. Magnus waited. The room was prepared for visitors, the fire banked with peat, and on the table a bottle of whiskey and the ginger cake he bought in Safeways the last time he was in Lerwick. He could feel himself dozing, but he didn't want to go to bed in case someone should call at the house. If there was a light at the window, someone might come full of laughter and rams and stories. For 8 years, nobody had visited to wish him Happy New Year, but still he waited, just in case. He must have slept. If he'd been awake, he'd have heard them coming because there was nothing quiet in their approach. They weren't creeping up on him. He'd have heard their laughter and the stumbling, seen the wild swaying of the torch beam through the uncurtained window. He was woken by the banging on the door, came to with a start, knowing he'd been in the middle of a nightmare, but not sure of the details. "Come in," he shouted, "come in, come in." He struggled to his feet, stiff and aching. They must already be in the storm porch. He heard the hiss of their whispers. The door was pushed open, letting in a blast of freezing air and two young girls who were as gaudy and brightly coloured as exotic birds. He saw they were drunk. They stood propping each other up. They weren't dressed for the weather, yet their cheeks were flushed and he could feel the health of them like heat. One was fair and one was dark. The fair one was prettier, round and soft, but Magnus noticed the dark one first. Her black hair was streaked with luminescent blue. More than anything, he would have liked to reach out and touch the hair, but he knew better than to do that. It would only scare them away. "Come in," he said again, although they were already in the room. He thought he must sound like a foolish old man repeating the same words, making no sense at all. People had always laughed at him. They called him slow, and perhaps they were right. He felt a smile crawl across his face and heard his mother's words in his head. "Will you wipe that stupid grin from your face? Do you want folk to think you're dafter than you really are?" The girls giggled and stepped further into the room. He shut the doors behind them, the outside door which had walked with the weather and led into the porch, and the one into the house. He wanted to keep out the cold, and he was frightened that they might escape. He couldn't believe that such beautiful creatures had turned up on his doorstep.
So I kind of want to clap after that.
Yeah.
But that's the beginning of the book, as Anne says, and it's as good a place to start as any, because I think it incorporates all sorts of aspects that this book introduces us to, as the first in the Shetland series, from the customs and traditions to the cold, the dark, the extreme weather, etc., and how those play out in the book. Those things play out in the book. So, shall I throw a question out, or Gordon, do you want to?
I thought what was interesting. I was just you throw one out, Frankie, but it was funny. I actually went to Anne and said to Anne, "Where did the idea for the book come from?" So I just asked her, and she came. I'll just read you this because I think it's quite interesting from her point of view. She said it grew out of a birdwatching trip to the islands in midwinter. A very rare vagrant had turned up, an American coot. And as Tim was a passionate birder, we day tripped to the island to see it, which was quite mad, because a 14-hour overnight trip in a ferry from Aberdeen arrived at 7:30 in the morning. It didn't get light till 10 o'clock. It had snowed and there were ravens very black against the snow. Because I'm a crime writer, this is what Anne said, I thought if there was blood too, it would be mythic, like a fairy tale. So the book started with that image. And I thought that, for me, that was quite interesting, that fairy tale line about the whole mythic background to the books, because it kind of feels like that to me, the whole book, that kind of, I don't know whether it's the setting or the snow or it's just there's something about the whole book that just had that mythic feeling about it. And I don't know if that resonates with anyone else.
I think for me, maybe that sort of mythic, slightly fairy tale aspect, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms until Anne gave us that information. But the sort of the cultural aspects, which are partly made up's too strong a word, but Up Hellier, for example, really came into being in only 150 years ago or whatever it was, rather than thousands and thousands of years ago. However, of course, it's a replay of imagined and possibly, you might think, fairy tale type scenarios, so storytelling through other ways. So for me, that's where the fairy tale aspects come in. I don't know, how does anybody else feel?
I can see what you're saying now in terms of the fairy tale aspect. I never thought of that as I was reading the book, but it was very, I mean, the opening itself was very atmospheric, and immediately I just felt that kind of something creepy is going to be happening here. Do you know what I mean? The way it's like, it was said, there was no fluff. It was kind of beautifully written in terms of setting the mystery and the suspense immediately. So you kind of knew something's going to happen, but what? You know, that was the first thing that came to my head. So, but I like the whole idea of the fairy tale and Gothic sense behind it, because now that you say it, it does make sense.
Gordon?
Yeah, the fairy tale bit for me, I hadn't picked up on, but what I did think was it felt very pure Shetland. There was almost a perception of it's a very wholesome image was given from, and the snow really helped that as well, because you get the very clean, crisp. It's you know, the fact the body's lying in the snow, it's very visible because of the colours against the snow. And then just to spin it, we're comparing it to Bloody January later on, which isn't quite so clean and crisp in Glasgow in the 70s. You know, they've got polar opposites coming. But yeah, I did think one of the themes of the book, for obviously if we've read it through, we know that there is an element of trying to show the two sides of Shetland, as it were. So starting it with that very clean imagery works very well in the context of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I also got a sense there's a real sense in this book about incomers and people that there's people who belong there, who are there, that cultural thing about an island. But there's some of it, don't want to give away plot spoilers, but some of the incomers are not really incomers, but they still feel like that. They never feel at home. The whole book has got that sense of, I'm not even sure what's going on here because I'm not one of them, which I thought was a really clever trick to play the whole way through the book.
Yeah.
Outsiders. I think having outsiders as opposed to incomers or new arrivers or people from elsewhere, I think outsiders is a great term, and I think she uses that contrast really, really well, and one becomes involved in those dynamics, I think, very quickly, and probably I don't know, but I mean I enjoy books most when I can put myself in them, which some of you may have heard me say before. And you know, there are aspects, I'm sure, for everybody where we have been both. We've been an outsider and an incomer, and perhaps we're part of our own tribe at some point as well. And so it's really fascinating, the interplay between all of that and how she then sort of brings the characters out and the particular kind of nuance to those issues of being an incomer, an outsider, or a regular inhabitant. I've just forgotten what the word I was using for that is.
Very much something I picked up on as well, because I was born in the central belt of Scotland, lived a large part of my childhood in the Highlands, and you move up there, you talk differently than everyone else, and you do feel different to those round about you, and sometimes people do prey upon that, just that difference. And even within the police force, when Jimmy Perez is doing the investigation, but the guy from Inverness who's from Liverpool as well, so there's another element of outsider coming in. So you've got the Inverness force, and there is an element of them and us within the police, and they talk about, do you want a local to do this? Do you want one of the outsiders to do it? So it's definitely one of the concurrent themes running through the whole story. Is this there's people who belong, and there's people who perhaps don't belong in this small community.
Yeah, and even with the community itself, like, you know, I live in a village, and when I moved here, I totally could relate to that whole, she's not from here. You know, someone stole my front fence when I first moved here, as if to say, like, you don't belong. It's okay now, I've been here a while, but that was the kind of impression that, you know, I could totally relate to that feeling of not being a part of it. And as much as you try and fit in, there's still always that, you know, you are not one of us. that whole, they want to keep it in the community and protect, even though they know certain things that, you know, I don't want to say anything without spoiling it, but you know, they know certain things and they have certain ideas of things, but there's still that community protection, almost like we'll deal with it ourselves. You know, you don't belong here type thing.
Yeah, we don't want to look too closely into something because then we might have to admit to perhaps not always functioning in the most accommodating of ways.
Yeah.
But isn't that one of the keys? One of the things I enjoyed about the book is that's exactly what Anne spends a lot of time is unpeeling, because people don't want to give up what they know, what they might know, because they just don't want to be that person. They have got that sort of, I'm not going to tell you, you should either know or it's someone else in my group. What I found odd is because I have to admit, I've got to say this, I've never seen the Shetland TV series, right? So I must be one of you on the planet that's never seen it. But I found even Jimmy's character was played a bit as an outsider, even though he's not, because he actually comes from a wee island into a big island. And I think that's a clever way of him he keeps hitting barriers.
Yeah.
He knows there's something not right, but he keeps hitting barriers. But it's not like someone coming in from Glasgow or London or New York. He's actually got as much right to be there. But that played well for me because the frustration in the book comes across, or the frustration with him. I don't know if you think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, his barriers are on, it's so multi-leveled because, you know, this is the first time we meet him. We hear a little bit about his background and why, for example, he has a surname that one wouldn't naturally imagine came from Shetland. We hear that he was married. We start to hear the things that, you know, as with all good books at the first in the series, that we know we're going to find out more about and uncover more about, but that they are all fundamental to these barriers. You know, does he stay on Shetland? Did he come back? Where did he come back from with his marriage? You know, what impact has that had? How does he get on with the rest of the team? Where does he sit in their idea of what, you know, who is a true Shetlander and who isn't, etc. It's fascinating stuff, and she's a tour de force when it comes to this sort of unpeeling of small community. I mean, it's a masterpiece really in how to get us in, how to pull us in.
And Gordon, one thing, Magnus, the kind of, not the central character, but because I kind of for a while, Jimmy is not the central character the whole way through this. I mean, it's not a Jimmy Perez story. It's not like DI, you know, he solves all the issues. But Magnus being slightly, shall we say, I'm trying to think of the PC, mentally challenged, having a character who looks upon the world in a different way, I thought was quite a brave thing to do, because for me, he's got such an odd view on what's going on. And therefore you have to play back to that all the time. And yet that works really, really well, because there was almost a sense of, well, he knows a lot of stuff, he just isn't telling us.
Yeah. There's a naivety, I think, is probably the way I thought of him. He's a very, it sounds daft to say that the principal suspect's an innocent character, but he wasn't innocent in some regards. But as the story digs in and as we get to know a bit more about him and what he's thinking, we know that he knows perhaps more than he's sharing, and he's been, you know, for his own reasons, he's not wanted to share the information. He's keeping it to himself because he was told to, basically, and if you're told to do something, that's what you do. So it's quite a fascinating process and how they worked around that. And it wasn't just Jimmy Perez had to work around that. There were other characters as well, and conversation with him had to find a way to negotiate his own sense of right and wrong to get what they wanted from him.
Yeah. And Noelle, the other thing I think is that we talked about this earlier, but the setting, just the various, I know that sounds really odd, snow in Shetland, just the start point for me was at odds with what you expect, because my father comes from a fishing town on the coast, and when it snows, the snow vanishes in no time at all.
Yeah.
And one of the things for me was that the whole way through, Anne manages to use the scenery, the backgrounds, whether it's up Hellier, whether it's the bays, whether it's the sea, whether it's the boats, the whole thing hovers in the background and kind of, I go back to that mystic thing, but it gives it that feeling of this is born and bred here. This story came from inside the land. That was my feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, what I loved about it, I love snow for one, and I thought that the snow really brought that atmosphere there, in terms of, you know, with Magnus, for instance, the Snow White, innocent, childlike. You know, you can link all those things, and then you get those imagery, the imagery of the blood in the snow. You know, and all those feelings that it evokes. Like immediately, everything, you get that sense of despair, panic, innocence, like so many different things just from the atmosphere itself, the island and the isolation, you know, keeping everything in. It was just wrapped up beautifully. I really, really enjoyed it. And now, of course, I want to visit.
And for me, the other thing, which is that unpeeling, which she does, there's actually quite a depth to everything about it. It's not like, well, here's a little bit of information and it moves on. It actually cleverly unpeels something, and it's only maybe 3 or 4 or 5 pages later you go back and think, well, hang on a minute, did they not just say, or did they not? And that for me kept me going backwards. I had a lot of going back through a few pages, and that's a good thing for me, because it was kind of like, didn't they just say X, or didn't they just say Y? Because given the breadth of the characters in this and also their interrelationship, I think that was key to me on the book.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that she did that was very much part of that was the fact that the characters are all ages, all backgrounds. There is, and therefore that in itself adds to the layers and the complications and the interplay. And she's dealt with all of those ages, all of those types of things. We've already talked about Magnus and you know, his own problems, and gosh, she deals with that beautifully.
Yeah.
Especially if you consider that this was written 15 years ago, and of course so much has moved on in how we look at mental health, how we look at all sorts of societal things that come up, you know, relationships between age groups, etc., all sorts of things that come up in this story. She's been very perceptive, I think, and it stands up very well 15 years on. And I think, so I had read a lot of Ann Cleeves, but I hadn't read the Shetland series quite specifically because I had started watching the TV series. So I think it's been quite interesting to do it what I would consider the wrong way around. I would never normally I wouldn't do both. I can't do both. My brain will explode. So it was really interesting to do it the other way around. And I think I am, go with the book first, people.
We need to move on in a minute, but just any final words, Noelle, about the book?
I really loved it. It was my first kind of dip into this series. I haven't seen the TV series, so that was quite good. And I'll definitely be continuing with it because I just thought the characters, the atmosphere, everything was just beautifully packaged.
Gordon?
Well, I'm the same. Hands up, I hadn't read any of Ann's books at all, and I don't really watch a lot of TV, so I'd not seen the show either. So I came in totally blind. Finished it 3 or 4 days ago, loved it. I've already bought another one in the series, so I'll create a problem for my reading pile, but there we go. But yeah, I want more. And so that's always a good endorsement when you read the first and go, yeah, I need more from these characters.
Yeah, I think it stands up so well. I think it's really fascinating because I think the 3 books that we've read for this month all come from such different places and are written in such very different ways. So it's been a fascinating process. And I think sort of Anne's there as the classic, I would suggest at this point.
Well, at this point, usually I'd hold the book up and say that was Ann Cleeves and Raven Black. However, I sold it so well, my wife has just taken it out the door. So she's away to read it. I thought, well, fine, that's as good an endorsement as she get. So that was Ann Cleeves, that was Raven Black. We're going to move on, and let's be honest with you, this is a slightly different book in that Alan Parks in Bloody January. So, but there are bits you could put across. So Gordon's going to do a little bit of an intro, and then we've got Alan actually on video to do a reading from the book as well.
Okay. I'm reading from a page because I actually have the audiobook and I have the digital book. I don't have a physical copy, so I'm having to do it blind.
Frankie's doing well.
Thank you, Hanky. So, Bloody January by Alan Parks. So, when a teenage boy shoots a young woman dead in the middle of a busy Glasgow street and then commits suicide, Detective Harry McCoy is sure of one thing: it wasn't a random act of violence. With his new partner in tow, McCoy uses his underworld network to lead the investigation, but soon runs up against a secret society led by Glasgow's wealthiest family, the Dunlops. McCoy's boss doesn't want him to investigate. The Dunlops seem untouchable, but McCoy has other ideas. A helter-skelter tale winding from moneyed elite to hipster music groupies to the brutal gangs of the urban wasteland, Bloody January brings to life the dark underbelly of 1970s Glasgow and introduces a dark and electrifying new voice in Scottish noir.
Now we'll get a short video of Alan.
Hi there, my name's Alan Parks and I'm going to read a little bit from Bloody January. So, here we go. McCoy headed along the corridor towards the stairs, heels clicking on the metal walkway, breath clouding out in front of him. Never changed, Berlin, freezing in the winter, boiling in the summer. The old Victorian building was on its last legs, wasn't built for the number of prisoners they had stuffed into it now. 3, sometimes 4 of them locked up in a cell made for 2. No wonder the whole prison stank. The smell of overflowing slop buckets and stale sweat was so thick it caught in the back of your throat as soon as the big doors opened, stuck to your clothes even after you'd left. He'd been coming up here since his first weeks on the beat. Only good thing about Berlin was that it saved you going anywhere else. The whole spectrum of Glasgow's wrongdoers ended up in here. From rapists and murderers, nonces and kiddie fiddlers, to bewildered old men caught coming out the co-op with 2 tins of salmon stuffed up their jumpers. And their wives not long in the ground. Berlin wasn't fussy, it took them all in. He leant over the balcony rail, peered through the netting at the fog of tobacco smoke at the rec hall below. Usual crowd milling about in their denims and white plimsolls. A couple of boys whose names he couldn't remember playing ping pong. Low-level troops from the gangs in the Milton gathered round the pool table. All long hair, moustaches and borstal tattoos. One of them pointed with his cue as Jack Thompson was wheeled in front of the TV, started sniggering. A year ago, he'd been too scared to even look at someone like Thompson. Now the poor bastard had a dent in his head so deep it was visible from up here. That's what happens when someone takes a sledgehammer to each knee and then gives you a few whacks in the head for luck. Can't walk and your brain's so scrambled you don't even know where you are. He buttoned up his trench coat, blew in his hands. It really was fucking freezing in here. A wee fat guy stood up from the card school, looked up and nodded. Steph Andrews, still kidding himself that no one here knew he was a tout. McCoy dug in his pocket, took out one of the packets of Regal he'd brought with him and dropped it over the side. Steph had caught it, pocketed it and was off before anyone even noticed. First row of a visit to Berlin. Bring fags. McCoy leant over a bit further, still couldn't see the reason he'd come up here. Feeding time at the zoo, eh? He turned and Tommy Mullen was leaning on the rail next to him. He took his cap off, scratched at his head. When McCoy had first started coming up to Berlin, Mullen's hair had been black. It was mostly green now.
Gordon, do you want to kick us off in this one then?
He did well picking a bit with only 2 sweary words in it, didn't he?
I know, I was a bit worried.
Yeah, I was a bit worried about the reading.
Well, we've gone from the fairy tale in the Shetlands to very much not the fairy tale in Glasgow. It's described as noir. It's dark. I would call it gritty. It's definitely earthy at places. And the content is, shall we say, mature audiences is maybe the best way to go. There's a lot of disturbing elements to it, shall we say, in terms of what the bad guys are up to and what generally goes on in Glasgow. But in terms of being an introduction to a series, it really sets the tone. It really gives you that sense of I'm in Glasgow, it's the 70s. The book was set just before I was born, so I can't claim to have any real knowledge of it, but it just feels like a city I know but don't recognise, which I thought was quite interesting because, you know, there's places I'm familiar with, places he name checks, and I think, okay, it's not my perception of it, but it felt very real round about me at the same time, which, you know, you want from any book, just to put you in that world, and it wasn't always the nicest world to be put into, to be fair.
Noelle, did it take you back? Or take you back? I'm saying Glasgow.
Oh, it took me way back. Yeah. My gran is from Glasgow. Don't they all say that? But she was. I just love this book. I've had it for ages on my TBR. I love gritty, gangland, brutal. I love all that stuff. And this book delivered everything. The violence, corruption, the sociopaths, everything was just, for me, I thought it was just delicious. I loved it.
Frankie?
I can only reiterate what everybody has just said. I read it when it very, very first came out. I was very lucky to do an event with Alan and have done a number, and I've become a huge fan. I just love how he writes about Glasgow in that period. Now, obviously, from my voice, you can probably tell that I'm an outsider, but I live in Glasgow now and have for some years. And I am old enough to remember the 70s. And I am also old enough to remember how those of us that grew up elsewhere pictured Glasgow. And what Alan has done is bring that absolutely to life. I feel like that is the Glasgow that I imagined as this scary place when I was a child. And I can still see bits of it, when I'm around and about. Not in quite the same dramatic ways as he describes it, but it very much, I can identify with what he writes as being where I have chosen to call home. I love it. It's grim, it's gritty, it's gripping, it's kind of dirty, mucky, seedy. I mean, I have so many words, so many. So I'm going to shut up. But it's cracking. It's a cracking read.
Yeah.
I have to say, right, I am Glaswegian, right? I was brought up in the 70s and I was next to one of the worst areas in Glasgow. I wasn't in one myself. We were kind of insulated. And after the first 30 pages, I was going to throw this out the window, right? And there was a reason for it. And the reason is I actually emailed Alan. I said, my dad was police in the 60s and 70s. So he was actually, he was a constable in Glasgow Police in Central Division for like 25 years. And there was a couple of small things that Alan said that my dad wouldn't have said. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It's just not the way my dad would have said it, right? And I started to nitpick, right? And this is my mistake. I started to go, I don't think the number 14 bus runs from. I said to my wife, and then about page 31 or 30, I loved it. I just completely dropped that altogether and went with it. But I thought this was going to be the first time I'd have to go into a book club and say, do you know what? I didn't finish the book. Finish it whatsoever. But I adored it. And I struggled for a while to think why. But I'm going to ask you the same question, all of you. McCoy is so screwed up that Alan actually said to us, and I thought this was quite interesting. I asked him the question about this, and he said that one of the things he said was one of the ideas he had that McCoy would be more like any other 30-year-old in 1973 than a conventional policeman. Alan, it wasn't till he said that I realized that actually he just normalizes everything he shouldn't. Because McCoy to me was just the epitome of, and he's got all these problems and all the issues and everything he does, and he just normalizes it. He just rolls on to the next part of it. And I thought that was brilliant. I loved that part of the book.
Yeah, I absolutely love McCoy. I love a flawed character. And what I liked about it was, I get the fact that police officers are meant to be, these law-abiding, moral citizens, and, they would never do wrong. They would never cross the line. But McCoy is authentic in the sense of he's just a guy who happens to be a police officer. Do you know what I mean? And deep down, he has the best intentions. It's just how he goes about getting them, getting the means to an end. If he has to do X, Y, and Z, he has to do X, Y, and Z. He likes sex, he likes drugs. It was, like you say, that it was normalized for him as a bloke who happens to be a police officer. I loved his character, and I loved Waddy. That fantastic. Yeah. He almost stole the show for me, Waddy. I thought he was fantastic.
I think in a book that's as dark as that in places, you need a Watty to to give you those moments to lift it.
Yeah.
He is brilliant. But Watty was there, and one of the things McCoy says in the book is when he's talking to Watty is that sometimes it's what you have to do. You get in bed with the devil, but there's a trade-off, and they'll keep you right. They'll give you the information you need, and they ignore some of what you do, and you can ignore some of what they do. So he does address that. McCoy himself knows he's not living the most pure of lifestyles, but there's a means to his behaviors that he can justify it to himself.
But you also get the sense that he won't cross certain lines. There are certain lines that he won't cross. And that does come across. So like you're saying, he kind of says, there are things that you have to do, rub this person's back and they'll give you this information. But you do get that impression that there are still some no-go. He does have boundaries, doesn't he?
I thought that, and then there was a scene with a hammer near the end. I thought, okay. But yeah, he does have a moral code, and I think he does try and adhere to it as best he can, but he wavers, shall we say.
Yeah.
But Frankie, what I liked about it, or for me, what worked really well, Bridget Linton's just put in, she says she remembers the 70s and had to check when this came out to see if it had actually been written back then, in terms of was it written. And the bit that got me was that I lived in a police house where it's a different world to where it is now. The police back then played with the criminals, and the police played with each other all the time. It was a trade-off to get stuff done. That's the reality of the situation. We had more dodgy goods in our house sometimes than made any sense. That clearly we had the first video recorder anyone ever saw, first colour telly, an Afghan hound. Well, it was ridiculous. But that was the police back, and that's what I liked about Alan was his nemesis Cooper, the boy he's with, the bad guy, could be as bad as you want, but back then there was a sense of you had to work with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think though this is set in Glasgow, aspects of that could be set in lots of places in the UK in the 70s, where those relationships were really quite important to make society keep ticking along, the good, the bad and the ugly. And I think Alan has captured that really, really well in this, and goes on to do that, in the following books. I think, who doesn't want to meet McCoy? There's just, you want to go to the pub with him. There are other things that he does. You probably don't need to go to those places with him. And for those people who haven't read the book, I'm not going to tell you what they are, but it might be fascinating. But yeah, I want to hang out with him. That's bad. That's very bad. The best place to catch him, to be fair. He spends a lot of his time behind the glass.
Well, it's not so much he spends his time, a lot of time, whether it's drinks or drugs or smoking, but drinking, he finds various different places at various different times of day when you think, well, you're on duty. But actually, it works because I like the way that Alan takes McCoy to places where he shouldn't really be, and he knows he shouldn't, but that's how you get the job done.
Yeah, there's always a justification for being in that place. He's going to get some information. The fact that he's going to have, a certain amount to drink or to smoke, or he's going to do something else, he's getting information, or he's getting, it's all important. It's important to him and him solving what's going on.
Yeah. But I'll ask another question. Try not to give away the plot because it's difficult to talk about this book without giving it away. But his relationship with the bad boy relationship he has, I like that the backstory in that is what helps that make sense. Does that kind of make sense without giving that away?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very good tool to help bring it together and why things happen and all the rest of it. Again, really difficult to talk about it without saying what's going on.
And I think it's also good.
Sorry, No, go.
I was just going to say, for people who may not like McCoy to start off with, when you hear that aspect of it, you kind of go, right. It brings that it kind of turns things around. So I just thought it was brilliant.
It's quite good. We've got an outsider element to this story as well, because we also had the outsider element in Shetland. But McCoy within the police, he consorts with questionable characters, outsider element there. The questionable characters consider him an outsider because he's Polish. And then you've also got the fact all the Glasgow divisions seem to hate each other. So when at one point he has to go up to Partick, and it's nearly a war starts when he walks through the door. Yeah. So there's that whole, again, he's an outsider, although he's the good guy, he's the cop. He also has that, he's alienated, and he is to a degree working on his own, which I really like too.
I quite liked the fact there was a wee twist in that. I felt the other policemen in it, they were the outsiders. It wasn't all together. It wasn't like the police force were all together as one. There was a couple, right? Yeah, but actually, I felt McCoy was more part of the bad guys in many ways as an insider, even though he didn't want to be, and that wasn't where he wanted his life to be. I love the fact that he was, and there was nothing he can really do about it.
Yeah, it's an association he can't shake off.
Yeah, you can't turn back time. So, yeah, you know, what you are, you are. It's a good book.
The other key to me is it's funny because he asked the question about he wrote the original book. He said, I wanted a lot of Rolling Stones lyrics in it because it's one of the big cheats you can do. You know that thing when you do a 70s or a 60s book, use music from the time. And I said, why didn't you get it? And he said, until I found out how much it would cost me. Those references, that's a great way to do it, but he didn't need to, because I actually picked up an awful lot of what Glasgow was like back then.
Yeah,
which is kind of tough when you're doing it from today and looking back. Sorry, you go for it.
That's exactly what I was thinking, and what I was going to say was that the way he depicts it all, it could have been written. It could so easily have been written in the 70s. He sort of nailed all the different little aspects and things that are just really take you right into that moment, into that time. You know, it's almost if you think about it in colors as well, you know, they're kind of really 70s colors. The way the words he used, if you were to turn that into colors in your head, you'd be coming up with kind of dark grays and browns and horrible swirls of orange, and you know, it's all quite kind of, it's very nicely done.
Yeah.
Very of its time, but written now. Very clever.
I'll give you an example I love in this. Green's Playhouse, which became the Apollo, which is probably one of the most famous venues in the world. It was late 73, it became the Apollo. In the book, it's Green's Playhouse. And there's the moment when he actually goes up and he meets Bowie. In the book, it's not a giveaway, it's just one of those moments. But the funny thing about that was, I can't remember what the date was, but whatever the date was, Alan put an apology at the back to say,
yes,
move it forward 4 days to work. And the only reason that came is one of my friends is a Bowie fan, and he went, he never played then. I thought, really, I've caught him out, I found a flaw, and then at the end, I apologised for moving the date by 4 days.
Yeah, pretty serious research went on there.
Yeah. I think so. Anyway, right, so that was Bloody January by Alan Parks. I think general agreement is that we liked the book. So we'll move on. And the last book we've got is The Serial Killer's Wife by Alice Hunter. And Noelle, you're going to do, and thanks Gordon for having the book with you.
Yes, thanks.
Noelle, and then we'll hear a little bit from Alice.
Okay, so here's the blurb. Every marriage has its secrets. Beth and Tom Hardcastle are the envy of their neighborhood. They have the perfect marriage, the perfect house, the perfect family. When the police knock on their door one evening, Beth panics. Tom should be back from work now. What if he's crashed his car? She fears the worst, but the worst is beyond imagining. As the interrogation begins, Beth will find herself questioning everything she believed about her husband. They're saying he's a monster, and they're saying she knew.
And now we'll hear a little bit from Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice Hunter. I'm going to be reading a short extract from my novel, The Serial Killer's Wife. Tom. I call my solicitor, Maxwell Fielding, en route to Banbury Police Station. I don't believe there's any such thing as an informal chat where police interviews are concerned, and although I'm not being arrested or detained, according to D.I. Manning, I'm not taking any chances. Whatever this is about, I'm assuming they think I'm connected to the murder victim. So until I find out more, I want someone present who can advise me. The fluttering in my chest intensifies as we reach the station. A chill wind whips across the open space as the three of us walk from where D.S. Walters has parked his vehicle to the entrance of the police station. I shiver, cursing myself for not grabbing a coat before leaving the cottage. I had to leave my suit jacket in the car. I cross my arms firmly as I stride, stopping when I realise I'm too far ahead of the detectives. I'm not that eager to get inside. If I think I'm chilly now, I imagine it'll only get worse once they start on me. Don't jump to conclusions. You've not been arrested. My mind flits around as I attempt to predict the who, what, and where. I'm shown into a small room inside the station and told to sit and wait. These kinds of delaying tactics are employed to make you nervous, edgy, cause adrenaline to pump around your body while you sweat about what's to come. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I hope against all hope they really are just asking a few questions about someone who I've not seen forever, or even better, have never actually met. Maybe I don't even know the person, the victim. It could all be some tenuous link, like we went to the same gym, or they're an old banking client of mine. Yeah, that'll be it. I take a slow, long breath in, trying to compose myself. Don't want to appear guilty before I've even opened my mouth. My mind wanders to Beth's face as I left with the detectives, her mouth agape, all colour drained from her pretty, heart-shaped face. She looked afraid, like she had a reason to be. This isn't the first time I've been in a police station. It is the first time I've been interviewed in relation to a murder. I clench my fists under the rectangular table. My wedding ring digs into the flesh of the neighbouring fingers. I will my hands to relax again, pulling my arms from beneath the table and resting them loosely in front of me. I'll come across as less stressed if I do that. I close my eyes lightly, blocking out the dull yellow, windowless walls. The room is so claustrophobic, and that's without other bodies in here. Why couldn't they just ask their questions in the comfort of my own home, for God's sake? Because it's bad, the voice in my head answers. Oh, God, what's coming? My eyes spring open at the sound of the door. I guess I'm about to find out.
So, Noelle, we'll start with you on this one.
Again, this has this whole sense of community and outsider, insider, which was kind of weird that we all picked a book that had that theme. Beth and Tom come from London. They moved to the Cotswolds into a little village where they're kind of trying to start a new life and blend into the community. I loved the aspect behind this book. I mean, I'm not giving it away because it's in the blurb, but it talks about, they're saying that the wife knew. So all along you have this question as you're reading the book, how much does she know? And there's a lot of characters in this book that I found were quite unreliable. And I was really kind of picking each one out, going, what do they actually know? This person isn't what they seem. And by the end, I was kind of like gobsmacked in terms of what actually came about. This book, I had another one that had been sitting on my TBR forever. And I'm glad I read it. And I just looked at the reviews before we came on today, and it came out in May of this year, and it's already has 9,000 reviews, which is incredible. I don't know what else to say. I love the book. I thought it was chilling. I thought it was really twisty. In fact, I put twisty as a swear word. I'm not going to say what the word is. I thought it was really tense. And although there were aspects of it that kind of fit the whole psychological thriller formula, I still thought it was really well developed to the point where I was second guessing myself. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
What was your thoughts?
I don't really know where to start. I was a little disappointed. Again, I think probably because I couldn't put myself in it at all. And I don't know what it says about me that I'm more able to put myself in Alan Parks's Bloody January than I am in The Serial Killer's Wife, which is based not far from where I grew up and probably in an environment really similar. But that might well be what I struggled with. I found aspects of it maybe a little bit like you, Gordon, for the first little bit of Alan Parks where you were nitpicking. I suspect I was doing some of the same, which is very unfair on Alice because we all come at things from different perspectives. I think the concept is interesting. I'd recently read another book where a serial killer's wife was quite important to the plot line. So I think I maybe had that in the back of my head a bit. We know what happens, obviously, because it's there right from the beginning. What I think my problem was that I wasn't drawn in straight away, and it's got very short chapters, and I probably needed sort of longer ones to pull me into the characters a bit more. That saying, you know, some of the characters were intriguing and you wanted to find out more. Some not so much for me, but you know, c'est la vie. That's, you know, you win some, you lose some.
Gordon?
Oh, cast and vote. I enjoyed it. I did like it. I'm trying to think where to go with it. It's, again, one of these ones where slowly you get a bit more information drip fed to you. And the short chapters did help that to a degree, because you would get a, reveal, switch perspective, take on another part of the story, and you've got, well, that's in the background, you know that's happened. I quite like the punchiness of it for that, because you were getting little bits to advance your understanding of what was going on, and you know the bigger picture because the title gives away where we're going with it. But there is that again, and when we had Bloody January, we had this ambiguity of the morality of the main character, and I think in this one as well, you've got the two principal characters are Beth and Tom, and you're thinking, well, is he guilty? Looks like he is. Did she know? And that's what it comes down to, is like, what did she know? What did she understand? How much is she naively ignored? And how much has she chosen not to ask him about, I suppose, as well. So it was quite an interesting dynamic in terms of you're following Beth's story. I'm terrible with names, sorry, I have to keep checking the name of the characters. I'm awful with character names in everything I read. So I like series. By the time I get to book 6, I might remember the lead character's name. But as you're reading Beth's story, you're thinking, no, there's more to what you're telling. And I wanted to know what she was or wasn't sharing, and exactly what was going on. So yeah, it kept me going. It kept the pages turning, because I needed to know. By the time I'd got into the story, I was hooked enough I needed to have that resolution. I needed to see where it was going to take me. And although I thought I knew, I didn't know, which is always a bonus as well.
Yep.
I think what's interesting, I asked Alice, like I asked Anne and asked Alan, and who was it that mentioned we managed to pick 3 authors that begin with A. That was the link. It wasn't anything to do with anything else. We just randomly wanted to pick A. But one of the things she said was one of the ideas behind it came from a thought she had while she was working in prison with a group of men serving sentences for serious violent offences. She found herself wondering about the offenders' partners and if they'd actually known at the time about the crimes. And if they had known, what made them stay with someone? Yeah. And that's an interesting start point, because those questions drove the plot. And for my money, what I thought.
Gordon, he looks very he
doesn't like parting with his money, that's what it is.
Yeah, so if they tell everything at the beginning, the book would last like 3 pages.
Yeah.
And for me, the clever bit was not doing that, because I kept thinking, when I got to the end, I have to say at some points I did find myself thinking, but they know they're telling me a lie, or they're telling themselves a lie. But the truth is, actually, I thought this book was more about, in some ways, manipulation. Yeah. It's how you manipulate each other, I think, lay in the background all the way through this. Does that resonate with anyone?
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And I think with psychological thrillers, manipulation is a very common theme anyways, because a lot of the time they're also manipulating the reader into believing one thing while delivering something else. So I totally agree in terms of manipulation. I thought it was, I like Gordon, I like the short chapters as well, which kind of kept you going through the book. And with the whole idea of what Alice said about partners and wives, do they know? It's that whole level of denial alongside the manipulation. Do you know what I mean? So throughout that, I found that was really well done, with not just the 2 main characters, but some of the surrounding characters as well within the community. Yeah. I mean, I had my finger marked on one of them, and I thought, oh, he knows something, he's involved, he's doing, you know what I mean? And I'm not going to say any more, but yeah, it was, I thought it was clever.
Yeah. And Frankie, I know it's maybe not up there in terms of favourites from your point of view.
I now really want to like it.
I know. One of the other things I found, I don't know if you found about this, but also what I found was this book is about what you hide from yourself.
Yeah. And I think she did do that very well. I think, like the manipulation, I think we manipulate ourselves. You know, there's a constant battle within us about what we're prepared to believe about ourselves. And I think looking at that and that being a kind of a path of the novel was interesting. And I certainly think that there's plenty in there that's got legs. And, you know, it'll be really interesting, I think, to see what she does next and what path she goes down. But I think manipulation was the strongest aspect throughout the novel. And I think the lies we tell ourselves were crucial to that. That's the bit I could put myself into.
I think, Gordon, the other thing is, and we've said this before, if you take the first two books we had, Raven Black, what the title doesn't tell you, other than it gives you an image, but it doesn't tell you what the book's about. If you go to Bloody January, whereas this book, it's quite a brief title. I know it's the kind of thing a lot of people do at the moment. It's kind of one of those titles where it grabs you and it says, but actually, you mentioned it, it does kind of make it what it is. It's not as if you can hide that bit of it, which I think actually sets yourself up with quite a challenge when you're writing it.
Yeah, I mean, it wears its heart on its sleeve. I mean, you know exactly where you're going to go with it. So what's the story? And then you hear the blurb. And it's a shame we didn't get to hear Alice speak just now, because it'd be interesting to see what she singled out for her reading, because there's a couple of bits at the very start of the book do set the scene very well of the knock at the door and everything changes, and it was very well done. But yeah, and I think this is where we come back to we talked about layers before, because you know what the outside image is going to be. Here, as we've got the serial killer's partner, we're going to have to start then digging deeper. What's the story? What do we need to know? What's the background? You know, how could they not have known? And it is that getting to the next level of truth. And is there more to it than that? And bringing in the new characters, the supporting cast as well, who may or may not have an influence upon what's going on in the lives of the two principal protagonists. So there's a lot of digging down to get to the actual story. It's not just the headline. There's a lot more to it than just what you might get from a title. And that, you know, those punchy wee chapters let you do that. Just nick a bit off here, nick a wee bit off there.
Yeah. And Noelle, one of the other things I think I found interesting about this is when the police are introduced to this, they are very much what you would expect to see if the police walked into your room. They're not a McCoy. I think the trick Alice has pulled is that's what you would experience if they walked in the room. Yeah. They're not, and for me, that actually resonated quite heavily because it wasn't trying to be clever with that. It probably was quite clever, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it just showed her own experience in terms of her background as well. You know, you got that feeling of, you know, they've got their person, and now they're going to try and pick at. I was going to say Alice. It's Beth, isn't it? They're trying to single out Beth in terms of what does she really know, but they also are quite manipulative as well. You know,
Absolutely.
they have their little tricks and ways of trying. And that's what I liked about that as well, because I kind of wondered with this title of the book, The Serial Killer's Wife, I thought, oh, surely it can't be that easy, you know? So I wondered then, is Tom really a serial killer? You know, is that what the twist is? You know, I don't know. Now I'm rambling. Sorry. I'm going on and on and on, but I just thought the whole concept with the police and the theme of manipulation and denial in terms of Beth herself and everything that was delivered, I always was on edge wondering, you know, as I turned the pages, have I guessed this right? And there were parts that I figured out, but I think that's because I also have a criminal justice background. And as a crime writer, I think you figure out a lot more things than maybe other readers might, or a crime reader, an avid crime reader, you can also figure out things. But yeah, sorry, I've lost the plot now. Go on.
No, it says, and Frankie, for me, again, I'll throw for any of you, one of the other things is when the police do get involved, one of the things at one point she's told, don't say too much. Yeah. And for my money, there's an authenticity that comes through the 3 books when you get to what the police will do, because that's exactly how the police operate, is let you talk.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now you're doing it to me.
Yeah. When you go, Frankie.
Absolutely, because it's the trick of it, isn't it? Nobody likes the silences. Everybody wants to fill the silence, and so you'll just fill the silence with stuff. And when you say stuff, you may well say something that then is of use to them, which is why you're told not to, to keep things to the bare minimum. But I think for somebody who is trying to figure out what's going on and how things have happened and why things have got to this point, etc., that's really difficult to do. Particularly for a nice middle-class woman from the Cotswolds. So there are some truths in some of that. So I think the way the police were portrayed is very is very current, which is interesting when you look at it in the context of the other 2 books we've read, which are really quite specific periods. So I think she's handled that very, very well. It's just not a book for me. That's all. It's not a bad book. Yeah. Just not a book for me.
We're just about out of time, so that's an hour gone by already in terms of where we're at. So we were talking about Raven Black by Ann Cleeves. We were talking about Serial Killer's Wife by Alice Hunter, and we were also talking about Bloody January by Alan Parks. So the next is the last Wednesday in 27th of October at 7 o'clock. We've got the next one. And the books you can see up there we're discussing are The Appeal by Janice Hallett, Craig Russell's Hyde, which has just picked up the McIlvanney Award, and Ian Rankin's Black and Blue, which is not the first Ian Rankin, but it's the one that everybody talks about in terms of the birth of Rebus. And it will be Jamie Crawford that will be chairing that. So tune in on the 27th of October. And from my end, can I just say a big thank you to Gordon, to Noelle, and to Frankie for being on this month's Bloody Scotland.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, Gordon's frozen again.
Oh, yeah, he has.
So, I'd like to say a big thank you to him, but he can't hear us.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank everyone in the Bloody Scotland team for an amazing festival that's just finished. I'm sure I'm not alone when I'm saying everyone who made it to Stirling and watched online has thoroughly enjoyed. So to the team behind the scenes and to everyone who made that possible for us, thank you very, very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for saying. Sorry, I froze there.
Yeah, we know. You were like this.
I was like, that's me, I'm finished. Goodbye. No, thank you. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. That is brilliant. Thanks very much for getting on board with the Bloody Scotland Book Club. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.